Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to just hold off for a couple more minutes to wait for everyone to join us. So let me wait for another minute or so, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So stay tuned. All right, so while I wait for a couple more people to join us, for those who are on right now, I've had a little bit of trouble with the audio for the past couple of webinars. So if you're all able to hear me okay and the sound is loud and clear, would you mind just dropping a quick note on that in either the chat box or the questions panel? Just let me know if the audio is okay or not. Perfect, thank you. Perfect. All right. So perfect. Thank you so much. That's great. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. It's about 1 minute past noon here in Eastern Time Zone. For those of you who are joining from the West Coast, good morning. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today's special office hours. So this is a brand new session. We haven't really hosted this before, but we've talked about hosting this session for quite a while. So the topic for today is specifically talking about the cutover session. So cutting over is essentially how you need to plan for and prepare for your final transition from desk to Service Cloud. So that is our main topic for today. The goal is hopefully to have everyone walk away from the session with more information and more knowledge around how to best run a final migration, how to best prepare for that final migration, and what things to consider that you made note of those specific a couple things here and there, small details that you might not have been aware of, but that we want to make sure that you know. So that will be the goal for today. My name is Suzanne Shahood. I'm a senior success specialist here at the Scale team at Salesforce. And sadly, Barbara Tassa was not able to make it to today's session. So I will be looking at your questions and juggling them a little bit alongside with actually presenting. So what I think I will do today is allow me to get through the deck first. It's just a couple of slides. It's not a lot of slides, but just to avoid any confusion and to try to not have too many interruptions, I'm going to go ahead and just run through my deck first. You're free to drop your questions in the questions panel in the meantime, but I think I will wait and take the questions towards the end. So we should have plenty of time. This is going to run for 50 minutes. The slides take maybe 20 minutes to go through, so we should have enough time towards the end to take everyone's questions. I can also unmute you if you would like to ask your questions live. So that brings me over to the next slide. Let's just get started right away here with a couple of logistics. So Barbara was going to help me with the questions in the questions panel. but because I'm on alone today, I will go ahead and review those questions at the very end. So you feel free to drop them throughout the session. I will look at each and every question, and I will make sure that everyone get their answers. I've also dropped the deck from today in the handout section. So if you look at your GoToWebinar panel, there's a section called handouts. It's right below, right above the chat section. You'll be able to see the PDF of today's deck. If you would like to grab it from there to follow along, save it for later, it's available for you. And we'll also share this out after the session in an email that goes out to everyone that attended today. The recording will also be shared. So we are recording this session, and this will also be published later on in our support center and shared out to everyone. I don't have a lot of polls today. I wanted to keep things fairly simple and focus on the contents. I believe I have 2 polls only for today, and I'm going to kick off my first poll here in just a minute. It's more so for me to be able to learn a little bit around where you're at with your transition and to be able to gauge your transition status. And the final reminder before I go ahead and start with the agenda is I do have a survey at the end. I would appreciate if everyone can take the survey to give us your feedback and let us know how we can improve these sessions. And again, just a reminder, drop your questions at any time. I will look at them towards the end of the deck. So with that, here is today's agenda, fairly small. We will start looking at an overview of what a cutover could look like. So you could actually put together your own cutover plan, and I'll show you just a sample of how you can actually structure a cutover plan for your organization. And with that cutover plan in mind, we're going to talk about details on what you need to do before, what you need to do during, and what you need to do after the actual cutover being done and completed. Next up, we'll talk about some minor details, but are very important things to consider. So just a few gotchas and good to knows when you are running your cutover migration or when you're preparing for the final cutover. A couple things that you may not have been aware of that I've listed here in my deck to make sure that everyone has that information. And then we'll wrap up the session. Again, it's not a long session today, but we will have enough time for Q&A, an open Q&A. I'll take your questions, and there's also a survey at the end that I want everyone to take today. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right into the overview. All right, so this is, and I'm hoping that the image here is clear enough for everyone to see. So this cutover is just a sample cutover plan. So this sample cutover plan represents the various steps and actions that you most likely would need to take during the actual cutover. So essentially, just to make sure that the definition of cutover is clear and there's no confusion, this is when you decide that your agents should no longer log into desk. They should stop working in desk and not handle any live cases in desk and move over as active agents in Service Cloud. So they would be users in Service Cloud and actively working on live email cases coming into that org. So this sample cutover plan here represents a couple of the major actions and steps that usually are part of your cutover process. So number 1 here, as you can see, is essentially disabling your channels in desk. If you plan to cut over from desk to Service Cloud, it would not make sense to allow cases to continue to pour into desk while trying to work on new cases in Service Cloud. So at some point, you'll have to decide, all right, I'm ready to turn off my channels in desk. And when you do that, you should start working in Service Cloud only and essentially never log into desk after that. As an admin, you still have access to desk, but ideally your support agents that are actively working on cases should no longer continue to access desk after that. And there's a couple things that you can do to prevent that. You can do a password reset after changing their email addresses in desk, or simply deactivate them as users in desk if you want to make sure that no one really logs into desk after that specific date that you might have in mind for your cutover. The natural step after that would be to run your migration. And while that is happening, it's usually a process that runs alongside with your agents starting to slowly work on cases in Service Cloud. And what you need to keep in mind here is that the data migration is it's very individual to each organization in terms of how long it might take. So for some customers, you might have a data migration that runs for hours and hours. Others, it might run within the hour. They have very few cases and very little data to move over. Worst case scenario is that your migration runs for several days. So as the migration is still happening, that does not block your agents from being able to work on cases. They would, in fact, be actively working on cases, but instead of doing it in desk, they would be doing it in Service Cloud. And at some point, of course, the migration would end, as you can see here, by step 5. And on step 6, I'm going to get back to this item a little bit later in my slides, but there is a post-migration action that needs to be handled and needs to be taken care of, and that is handling active cases that may have been still available in desk.com. I'm not going to go into detail here around step 6 here. This one requires a little bit more of an explanation. So I'm going to pause here, skip that, and I'm going to explain it more into detail once we reach that slide. But eventually you are done with the migration. There may be a little bit of post-migration cleanup, and we're going to talk about this towards the end as well. So again, this is just a sample. It might help you to sit down and actually write out the steps that you need to take to complete your cutover, what you need your agents to do, what you need to do as an admin, if there are any steps involved that would require assistance from our support team. It may help to simply draw it out like this or note it down so that you have an actual agenda of what will happen on the day or on the week of your cutover process. So take this as just an example. And let's hop in right away into, I have 3 slides here that will describe to you the things that you need to be aware of before the cutover and that you would need to have completed before the cutover. The next 2 slides will talk about the during and the after cutover. So let's start with the first one here, what you need to do before the cutover. And this is a phase that you really want to take your time with. You want to make sure that you have all these items fully completed and taken care of. Item number 1 is the most self-explanatory, your desk licenses. They should be swapped to your Service Cloud environment so that you have an org to use that is not just a trial, but an actual active org. So this definitely has to be completed ahead of your cutover. Preferably, you've already done this several weeks before deciding that you want to cut over. That leads us to step 2, configuration. So setting up your org. You want to make sure that you've properly and thoroughly configured your new organization in Salesforce. You should have added your agents as users in the new environment. You should have added your queues, any automation rules, built out your templates or macros if those are needed, etc. And one important key item here that sometimes actually gets forgotten is to activate your agents. So you don't need to just add them as users. You need to make sure that they are also activated within the org. So don't forget that important step. If they're just added as users, but they're not activated, they will not be able to log in and work on cases in Service Cloud. Next up, the final phase after that would be to test your setup. So you need to run through all the important features that you built to make sure that it's working the way you expect them to. So test your org, test your rules, test your macros. And the more thorough you are at this phase when you're testing things, the smaller risk of running into issues at the end when you're actually cutting over live. So this is a really important item here. You want to make sure that you didn't just set up your org and then you're ready to cut over, but you've actually tested things in your org and confirmed that they work the way you want them to work. When you're happy with that, so you have your licenses in your org, you've set up everything that you need in the org, you've tested it. Next up is training. This is really important. I cannot emphasize this enough. You really need to give your team enough time to familiarize themselves with this new environment. It doesn't really matter if your team has only used Desk in the past, or perhaps some of your agents never even used Desk and some of them did. It doesn't matter what background they have. You need to allow them time to watch agent training videos or use Trailhead if they want to test things in a safe Trailhead playground where there's no risk of them breaking anything that is live. This will really help your team adopt this new platform at a much higher rate. So training is really important. Make time for that. Give them a couple days to do this. If it's even possible, give them a full week of training to make sure that everyone is up to speed and properly onboarded on Service Cloud. Service Cloud. So this covers essentially the most important parts of the before, what you need to do before even thinking about the actual cutover. And I would say this phase takes different times for different customers, depends on, the time commitment that you're able to put into this phase. But be prepared to spend a couple of weeks to just prepare all these items thoroughly. So the configuration and testing, those two parts themselves could take a couple of weeks to complete. And then if you add to that the training, that might lead to a total of 3 to 4 weeks. So don't rush through this very first phase. It will really help your final phase if you've done all these items properly. All right, so that leads us to the next step, which would be during the cutover. So what would you need to do during the actual cutover? So this assumes that you've actually set a date for when you want to cut over. So let's say you've decided October 1st is our go-to date. We are going live on October 1st. So what do you need to do during the cutover? So here are the most important parts. The first thing you want to do is disable autoresponders in Service Cloud. You're going to need to deactivate those in your org before your cutover and that final migration. And the reason for that is because the migration involves creating cases and updating cases, you don't want to risk triggering autoresponder emails to customers that may already have received the emails, or you don't want to spam them with unnecessary emails during that process, depending on how many cases you're actually moving over. It's really important that you disable any case autoresponders. There's really no need to have those active during this phase. So disable those first in Service Cloud. The next thing you'll want to do is hop into your Desk account and do that step that a lot of people find really scary, but you do at some point need to disable your inbound channels in Desk. So that is most likely just your mailbox, that inbound mailbox in Desk that allows cases to be created in Desk.com. You need to turn that off. If you have any other inbound channels in Desk, so you may have social channels, Facebook or Twitter, any other sources that create cases in Desk, turn those off. Those must be deactivated at this time and during this phase. Once you've turned it off in Desk, you would hop right into Service Cloud and set up that same mailbox, but in Service Cloud. So it's not like we're asking you to turn off your mailbox in Desk and then lose out on cases. Now, they have nowhere to go. On the contrary, we know that you are turning it off in Desk, but right away you're going into Service Cloud and turning on your mailbox in Service Cloud. So you may want to test mailbox functionality in Service Cloud before taking this step, and that's perfectly fine. You can add a dummy account, a test mailbox, just to be able to see how the actual email functionality works. But when it comes to your actual main support address or support channel that used to create your cases in Desk, that mailbox is best to turn on at this phase only. So once you turn it off in Desk, just log into Service Cloud and add that same address in Service Cloud instead. Once you have that added and completed, your new cases will be created in Service Cloud instead. So that's where the cases will be created. That's where your email will be routed to instead of desk.com. So just to recap, you're going to turn off autoresponders in Service Cloud, go into Desk, turn off your inbound channels, mainly your inbound mailbox, go back to Service Cloud, and activate and enable your mailbox in Service Cloud instead. So that way you have no gap and the cases will be able to continue to flow, but instead of going into Desk, they go into Service Cloud. The next step here is for your agents to start working on those new cases. So now that you've added your mailbox in Service Cloud, right after you turned it off in Desk, you have these new cases coming in and they're starting to flow into Service Cloud instead. So your agents can actually start working on them right away in Service Cloud. And this is when, at this step and at this time where mailbox was turned off in Desk, mailbox was turned on in Service Cloud, agents are now working on cases in Service Cloud. This would be an ideal time to start your data migration. So this is when you can actually kick your migration and allow it to start running. You don't have to start it at this time, but it would be an ideal time to actually kick it off and have it start right away. You could start your migration after disabling the mailbox in Desk. So after step 2, you could, after disabling the inbound channels in Desk, start the migration right away. And then your agents start working in Service Cloud. So either options will work. There's no preference with one over the other. It's completely up to you. My recommendation though, and this is my personal recommendation, is you would want to make sure that you maybe check to see that your agents are able to start working slowly, slow but steady on a couple cases, things are working smoothly, and then start the migration from there. And running the migration, I'm going to talk about this at the end, but you would use our normal migration wizard to start the migration in your org and be able to start that import of data from Desk to Service Cloud. The final step here, and this is actually the biggest one here, handle remaining Desk cases in status open. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes, bear with me, to describe this one item alone. Because this one is a little complicated to explain, but hopefully once I'm done with my explanation, it will all make sense. So just bear with me, allow me to explain what this means. So again, just to recap, what we've done here during the cutover is you turned off your mailbox in Desk, you turned it on in Service Cloud, your agents are working in Service Cloud and they're happy, you triggered the migration and it's running, and it's gonna run for a while. There's something that you need to keep in mind here. For any cases that you had in Desk that were not closed or resolved at the time when you started the migration, so at the time when you clicked that button to start your migration, if there were any cases in Desk that had specifically status open, even possibly status new, but most likely status open. So we're mainly concerned here about open cases that were left in Desk. Then these cases will need to be handled in a very special way. And I'll explain what the plan would be for those cases. And before I walk you through the plan, one thing that you really want to try to do before even reaching this cutover phase is to try to start wrapping up your work in Desk. Try to resolve your cases in Desk as much as possible. Try to set those cases to pending or resolved or closed. If you end up with any leftover cases that are still open that you just could not resolve before you started the migration, then this is what you need to do for those cases. So here's the recommended plan. You need to make note of those cases. So make note of any cases that were left in Desk in status open when the migration was started. Then post-migration, so after the migration was completed, you need to find those cases in Service Cloud and send out a reply to your customers on each of those cases. Okay, So you need to make note of any leftover open cases in desk. And that's why it would be ideal to try to have as few open cases as possible in desk. If you can limit that to below 5 cases, that would be superb. So make note of any leftover open cases in desk at the time when you trigger your migration, and then find those cases in desk after the migration and send out a reply to each of your customers on those cases. So each case should be receiving an email from you sent out to those customers on those cases. And those replies, it can just be a pre-canned, pre-prepared reply. It can say something really simple, such as, we're updating our ticketing system. Here's your case number for reference. Just send them anything on those open cases. So you might be wondering why all this hassle? Why do I need to do this for specifically the open cases? I'll explain. So what happens is, if your customers send you a reply on that open case that was open in desk at the time of the migration, before you reach out to them first from the case in Service Cloud after the migration. Let me repeat that again. If the customers send you a reply, they send in a reply to you on that open case first, before you get a chance to reply out to them from Service Cloud, then their email is going to create a new case in Service Cloud. It will not thread in to that existing open case in Service Cloud that you have for them. So you need to try to think of it like this. For your closed and resolved cases that you had in desk when you were running your migration, you're not expecting a reply on those closed and resolved cases. You're not expecting a reply to come in from your customers, right? They're resolved, they're closed. So those, you can just leave those as is. You can forget about those cases. But for any open cases that you may have had in desk at the time of the migration that you simply were not able to resolve before running your last migration, on those cases, it means that the thread is still open. The customer may still reach out to you for help. They might reach out requesting more help because the case is technically still open. It was not resolved yet. So you will just want to make sure that you reach out to them first out of Service Cloud on that migrated case before they send in a response to you. This will make sure that when they do send you, it will come into that same case. It will not create any separate cases, and the threading will be retained. So I know this was a lot of information to digest. I will recap it again towards the very end of my slides, but the summary of it is, try to resolve your work in desk as much as possible before you start the migration. And if you're unable to do so, make note of any leftover open cases in desk and grab those cases later on after the migration. Grab them in Service Cloud and send out a canned response to your customer. That will make sure that the threading is retained when that customer sends back and wants to reach you. So I'm hoping I explained that as clearly as possible. Do let me know if any of that was unclear, and I'll go ahead and repeat that towards the end when we're done with our slides. And a big important note for this phase of your cutover, which is when you're running the migration, when you're doing the actual cutover, is keep your agents out of desk. Make sure that you're not working in desk anymore during this phase. So really important note there. And that brings us to the after cutover slide. So what needs to be done after the cutover? So there's a couple things here. Not all of these will apply to everyone, but there may be some post-migration cleanup needed. It's not always the case, but for some, you may need to do a little bit of cleanup in the org. For one, you would want to, for example, spot check your migrated data. You want to make sure that everything looks correct after the migration. More importantly, you want to handle those open cases in desk as I just walked through. You want to make sure that that is completely and fully done. All the open cases from desk were handled post-migration in Service Cloud. Another thing that you'll want to do is enable those autoresponders again. So we turned them off at the very beginning of our process. now we can turn them back on again. And again, this is optional. It might not apply to everyone if you don't need an autoresponder, but if you do, this would be the time to enable it and deactivate it again. And the final note here is running a Delta migration. So in some instances, you may need to run the migration again, a final Delta migration run. So maybe your cases were updated for some reason. Maybe you did have a couple agents in there that were still playing around with cases even when they shouldn't have, and you ended up having cases and information that was updated. So this, you were able to redo that migration and rerun it to make sure that your data is reflected accurately in Service Cloud. So when you're done with all this, and it's a lot of steps, so the cutover is not something that you can do without any sort of plan and preparation. I know it's a lot of steps, but when you're done with it, you are live in Service Cloud. And not only live, but your data will be fully moved over and imported into Service Cloud. So what you had in Desk, that last day when you were logged into Desk, will be fully reflected in your Service Cloud org. Okay? All right, so let's talk about a couple things to consider here. When running the final migration, whether it's the Delta migration or actually if you're just running a migration overall, you want to make sure that your migration wizard is up to date. So you want to make sure that you're using the very last version of our migration tool. And the easiest way to make sure you are on the most updated version and that you have that version installed is to grab it from App Exchange. So I have the link in here that goes straight to our tool. So once I share out the deck, and again, you have it in the handout section, you can click and grab the link from there to be able to update your package if you need to reinstall it. So if you do have an older version, when you reinstall the wizard, it will automatically just refresh and update the tool itself. And this does not affect any previously imported data. So this is really important because we do work on this package continuously and we fix potential bugs. We add in new, updated, improved features. So it's always recommended to make sure that you have the latest version installed in your org. The next important thing to consider here, we talked about this, but I really wanted to put it out here, is to try to resolve your cases in Desk as much as possible. It's for any cases that you cannot resolve and you have to leave them as open. We talked about what you need to do with those, but it would really help your process overall with moving over to Service Cloud and sort of closing out that Desk chapter. It will help you a great deal to try to wrap up your work in Desk. Try to complete everything. Try to get it all resolved and closed as much as possible. If it's not possible, we fully understand, and that's why I explained that process of what you would need to do if you do still have open cases. But try to keep this in the back of your head. Things will be much easier for you if you can get your cases to resolved status. So do try to work on that. I normally recommend spending the last week in Desk. So, if you've decided that, mid-October is your go-to date for your cutover, then a week before your cutover date, you're going to start to try to work on your cases as much as possible and just resolve them. Focus on those last couple of days in Desk and resolve your cases as much as you can. Another important item here, I touched on this in the beginning, but I want to mention it again, train your agents. Do not forget about the team that will actually be handling your cases live. This will have a direct impact on the success of your cutover. It really will. If your agents don't know how to use a product, how are they going to be expected to use it in a live environment and answer the cases in Service Cloud when cases are flowing in continuously and in a live setting? So you really need to think about this and make time for training. Share training resources with your team, prepare them, guide them. You make use of Trailhead. We have a lot of training guides on our own support center, and try to follow the recommended material as much as possible just to avoid any last minute stress right before the cutover. And I have a couple of resources linked in the next slide that I'll be sharing out. And the very last one here on this slide is the recommended time of actually running your migration. So it is best and absolutely best practice to run your migrations when your agents are not working. So we really highly recommend that you try to run your migrations outside of business hours. A good time to run it could be to kick it off on a Friday afternoon, for example, and allow it to run over the weekend to avoid having those, any cases accidentally being updated in desk while the migration is running, and while that data is being copied over from desk. So you can trigger it on a Friday, for instance, let it run over Friday night, Saturday night. It might be done by Sunday, possibly Monday morning, and you would have already prepared your team and instructed them that when Monday morning comes, you are no longer logging into desk. Instead, you're going to log right into Service Cloud and start working on your cases from there. So it's just a recommendation, and this is best practice, and I hope that it makes sense in a way that it would be best to run the migration when no one is really touching any records in there while the import is taking place. All right, so that pretty much concludes my summary of the cutover process. I did want to make sure that we leave time for questions. Before I hop into questions here, I want to talk about resources. So I've linked to a couple of resources here. We have a PDF deck with a cutover checklist, and I will also add this deck from today, so you can access that as well. I'll put it into that same document. It's a quick document that is external, so you can all access both decks, both the checklist and today's slides. I've also included a couple of resources for training. So we talked about training and the importance of training. You want to make sure that they get time to really practice before you cut over. So these two are great links to webinars and videos that can help your team get up to speed with basic functionality in Service Cloud. And then finally, I just linked a couple of general resources that might help. There's a setup checklist, just in case if you're still in the very beginning and exploring what you need to do, but still thinking about the cutover in the back of your head. There's an FAQ with a lot of frequently asked questions around how to set up specific things in Service Cloud. And then I've, of course, linked to the data migration wizard, how to use it if you have our accounts and our trial orgs that we may have provided you with, versus if you already have an existing org, meaning maybe you had an existing sales account with Salesforce and you're going to cut over and migrate to that existing account. So there are two different ways of using the tool, depending on what your org is. And I've linked both here for you so that you can use the correct resources for each of those two routes. So with that, I wanted to just quickly launch a poll here. I'm just curious to see if everyone on the call here today have decided a specific date for your cutover yet, or if you have not. So just drop your votes there just to give me a little bit of more information on what you have in mind and what you are leaning towards. Have you decided a date for the cutover, or are you still discussing this internally? And there's no right and wrong. I'm just interested to see where everyone is at. All right, perfect. Thank you so much. So it appears that the majority do have a date in mind, and that is great. And a few do not have a date yet. And again, it's perfectly fine. So the recommendation here is as early as possible, have a rough estimated date in mind. It does not have to be exact in any way, but it will most likely help you plan and map out all these steps you need to do. It will help you to map them out better and space them out over time, just to give you an idea of, all right, the second week of October, I need to complete these 3 tasks. third week of October, I should do these two things. And then, the last week of October, I'm doing this one thing only. It will help you map out and create a structure around these different action items that you really need to take during the cutover. Perfect. All right, great. Thank you so much for sharing that out. So that brings us to the Q&A. I'm going to take a look at your questions, and if anyone wants to be unmuted, I'll go ahead and do that. Before we take questions, just a quick reminder, there will be a survey at the end. Please help us improve these sessions and let us know what other content you would like to see, how this content was, and how it can be improved. It really helps us shape these office hours and shape our master classes in general. So we really appreciate any feedback that we can get from you all on the call. So with that, let me go ahead and take a quick look at the questions, and feel free to start dropping them in the questions panel or raise your hand if you want me to unmute you. And I will start with the first question here. All right, I'm going to read this out loud. When we initially ran the migration, we had a number of duplicate errors with contacts, which we corrected and merged in Desk. We are B2C. We recently ran another migration to add updated records, and a number of these popped up again as errors, and it looks like it orphaned some cases in notes and attachments. We're looking for the next big steps. All right, that's a pretty big question. Thank you, Vicky, for dropping that in. That I wish I could just answer that straight up here. That's going to require a little bit of troubleshooting. So we would actually have to look into your account. It sounds like it may be an existing account that you have, and it was not a brand new account. So you may have had existing data in there, and it interfered a little bit with the data that you were looking to import from desk.com. So Vicky, for this question, I'm going to ask you to please send this in. You can just copy paste your exact question and drop it into an email and send it out to support@desk.com. And I'll put it here in the chat. And I will talk to the support team and sync with them from there to see how we can best resolve this. We're going to definitely need your granted access to the accounts. So you will need to grant access to the Salesforce.com support team and also grant access to the Migration Wizard. And once we have access to both of those, we'll need your permission to log in, take a quick look at the error logs for your last two migrations. And from there, we'll send it over to our technical team and see if we can get a recommendation on how to best handle that. So I'll go ahead and I'll work with the support team and sync up with them on this. Vicky, if you can just please send us this in an email to support@desk.com, and we'll take it from there and we'll look into it and see what we can do to help. So thank you so much for letting us know that there is an issue. We definitely can help look at that and see how we can best resolve that. But it will require a little bit of digging into your logs to see what might have happened to cause that. And I have another question here. Can we please repeat the part about what to do with open desk cases once the cutover is made, and the part about the inbound emails? Yes, absolutely. I was expecting to have at least a couple people ask me to repeat that just to make sure that it's crystal clear. So let me cover that again. And thank you so much for letting me know that you want me to recap that. So again, it's a lot of steps involved in this. So I recognize that it's not easy to allow that information to sink in on the first time. So just to recap, the first thing you want to do is disable that inbound mail channel in Desk. So disable your mailboxes in Desk that allow cases to be created in Desk. So you do that as step one. After you disable your inbound channel in Desk, hop over to Service Cloud and enable the mailbox in there instead to allow your cases to instead flow into Service Cloud live rather than coming into Desk live. So once you've taken care of that mailbox setup of turning off one and turning on the other, that's when you want to start reviewing your data that you have in Desk and that you're working with. So most likely the easiest way to do this would be to look into your all cases filter. So you most likely have a default filter in Desk called all cases, and you can sort by the status to see how many cases do you have out of all these different statuses. An easier route would even be if you have a specific filter for open cases versus non-open cases, check to confirm how many open cases do you have. If you have any leftover cases in there in desk that are still open and were not resolved, so they never got a chance to reach status resolved or closed at that time when you turned off the email channel and you triggered the migration to start running, then you want to make note of those cases. Note down the desk ID, note down who the customer was, maybe even what the subject line was on those cases. You can easily run an export from within your agent panel on just those open cases if you want to just save that down as a separate file. Then post migration, so when the migration is done, you are going to go into Service Cloud and find those cases. And once you've found those cases, for each and every one of those cases, you want to send out a reply to your customer first. So before they get a chance to send you, you want to send them first. And you can send them anything. A proposed pre-canned reply would be, hello, dear customer, we're updating our ticketing system. Here is your new case number, for example, and provide them with the new case number that they have on that case in Service Cloud, because the numbers are different between Desk and Service Cloud. So it could be something as simple as that. Of course, the customer is not aware of why you're sending that respond out all of a sudden, other than you're changing your system. But the actual purpose behind that is to keep the I'm not going to be able to say the word, just keep the threading of the case so that when they do send you on that case, it just threads in naturally to that same existing case. Because if they send you on any of those open cases, if they send you first, before you get a chance to reach out to them from Service Cloud, then their response would create a new separate case. So this is a way to try to avoid that from happening. And when I say post-migration, yes, Denise. So when I say post-migration, I mean, so you're saying you mean after those open cases from desk are moved into Service Cloud. Correct. So when everything is done and complete, the migration was done, those open cases in desk are of course mapped over as open cases in Service Cloud. And you would pick them up from Service Cloud in that open state, send off a reply to revert that status depending. That way, you sent them first. Anything that comes back from the customer will naturally come back into that case. So I hope I explained that well. Let me know otherwise. It's basically just a way, you're welcome, just to keep that threading intact, avoid any separate cases that really don't need to be created as brand new cases. So I hope that makes sense. Thank you so much for reminding me to go over that again. This is the question that we get asked about the most when it comes to the cutover sessions. And this was really one of the reasons why we decided to run a specific session for just cutover question and cutover actions, because we get asked about this a lot. What do I do with my cases in desk? How does it map over? What happens if I'm not done in desk and I'm ready to migrate and things like these? So I'm hoping that this office hours has been helpful. I'm hoping that you've had some of your questions answered. We are almost at time, but I do have one final poll to launch. I would just like to see and hear from everyone that is on the call today. And thank you so much for agreeing to share with me how you feel. Would you like to see our team provide you with additional resources? Do you feel that this is sufficient to get you started on a cutover plan? Or do you feel that you still need additional resources, or you're quite not sure yet, you want to review some more? And it's completely okay to answer either of these. It's just a way for us to see if we need to dive even deeper, if we need to maybe run these sessions more often. And if you have any specific information that you want to write out and let us know as in terms of feedback, then the survey would be the perfect opportunity to do that. Let us know in the survey what you feel about the resources and what else we can do to help you get started with these steps to plan for your cutover. Because as it stands now, we're just a couple months away from the final desk shutoff. And this would really be a good time to start planning for your cutover so that you don't have to do these towards the very, very end. There's no need to cause stress, towards the very last month of desk being around. So do let us know how you feel and what we can do to help you. And it looks like, I'm going to share the results here. Thank you so much. It looks like it's around 50-50. Some feel that this is enough to get them started. Some want some time to review. So you can review the deck, review the recording, see how you feel then. And a few feel that they still need additional resources. So specifically for you who answered that you do need more resources, let us know in the survey what that would be. And I would also like to ask for you who feel that this was sufficient, let us know as well in the survey what worked with today's session and what may not have worked so we can work on improving that. And I think with that, we are exactly at time. So I am going to go ahead and say thank you everyone for joining today's session. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate that you spent this hour with me. Take the survey and I hope to see you in our next office hours and upcoming master classes. Thank you so much, everyone. Goodbye.